In this gripping tale, Ethan Carter, a wealthy and arrogant businessman, finds himself in an unexpected Wacth bet that forces him to marry a woman who doesn't fit his usual type. Olivia Turner, a strong-willed woman with a painful past tied to Ethan's ruthless actions, agrees to the marriage, but not for the reasons Ethan imagines. As their lives intertwine, secrets are revealed, emotions rise, and both Ethan and Olivia are pushed to confront the darkest parts of their pasts. Will Ethan's cold heart thaw in time to redeem himself? Can Olivia forgive the man who tore her family apart? And what happens when the lines between revenge and love start to blur? Make sure to watch until the end to see how their story unfolds. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think forgiveness is possible? Or are some wounds too deep to heal? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this. Now, let's dive into the emotional roller coaster that is Ethan and Olivia's journey. Ethan Carter was the kind of man who knew how to win. Whether it was sealing multi-million-dollar deals, dating the most stunning women in New York, or throwing extravagant parties in his luxurious penthouse, everything seemed to fall into place for him. His life was a series of conquests, each one more lavish than the last. As the CEO of Carter Enterprises, Ethan had built a business empire from the ground up. Ruthlessness was his weapon of choice, and he wielded it unapologetically. To him, life was a game, and he played to win. He had no room for sentimentality or compassion. Those were distractions in a world where power and wealth reigned supreme. It was at one of these lavish parties, surrounded by the rich and powerful, that Ethan found himself engaged in a conversation that would change everything. His best friend, Ryan Collins, stood beside him laughing as they both surveyed the crowd. Ryan was Ethan's opposite in many ways, easygoing, reckless, and a bit of a playboy. He thrived on adventure, always seeking the next thrill. But it was Ryan's tendency to challenge Ethan that kept their friendship interesting. They competed constantly, pushing each other to the limits, and tonight would be no different. "So, Ethan," Ryan said with a sly grin, taking a sip from his glass of whiskey, "you've conquered everything. Money, women, business. Is there anything left for you to prove?" Ethan smirked, leaning casually against the bar. "Not really. Life's pretty easy when you're on top." Ryan chuckled. "You've always got it all figured out, don't you? But I wonder?" His voice trailed off, his eyes glinting with mischief. "What if you couldn't win? What if there was something you couldn't control?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. "Like what?" "Like a woman," Ryan replied. "Not just any woman, though. I'm talking about someone who doesn't fit your type. Someone who's not interested in your money, your power, or your charm. Someone who can't be bought or controlled." Ethan scoffed. "Please. Every woman has a price. They all want something, whether it's money, status, or the thrill of being with someone like me." Ryan leaned in, his grin widening. "I'm not so sure. How about a bet?" Ethan's competitive spirit kicked in. "A bet? What kind of bet?" "I bet you couldn't marry a woman who doesn't fit your usual type," Ryan said, his tone challenging. "And I don't mean just any woman. You'll find someone for you. But here's the catch. You have to stay married for 6 months. No divorces, no running away. You have to make it work." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "That's ridiculous." Ryan's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Afraid you'll lose?" Ethan's pride flared. Losing wasn't in his vocabulary. He never backed down from a challenge. "What's the prize?" Ryan raised his glass, his voice dripping with confidence. $1 million. "But it's not really about the money, is it? It's about proving that you can win at anything, even love." Ethan's mind raced. He had never been interested in long-term relationships, let alone marriage. But the idea of a challenge, of proving Ryan wrong, was too tempting to resist. Besides, 6 months wasn't that long. How hard could it be? "You're on," Ethan said, clinking his glass against Ryan's. Ryan smiled, satisfied. "I've got the perfect woman in mind." Olivia Turner had never been one to seek out attention. In fact, she preferred living under the radar, focusing on her work, and maintaining a quiet, independent life. As a young woman in her early 30s, she was confident, smart, and capable, traits she had honed after years of hardship. Her family had once owned a small but promising business, a local tech startup with dreams of growing into something more. That was until Carter Enterprises came along. Ethan Carter's company had swiftly and ruthlessly crushed her father's business, leaving her family in financial ruin. The stress had consumed her father, eventually leading to his untimely death. Olivia had sworn never to forgive Ethan Carter. She hated him with every fiber of her being, but she had never confronted him. Instead, she had rebuilt her life in the shadows, working hard and supporting her mother. But the pain never left her. It was a late afternoon when Olivia received a message from Ryan Collins, someone she barely knew but had met once at a tech event. The message was odd, a proposal of sorts. He wanted to meet, but the details were vague. Intrigued and slightly wary, Olivia agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe in the city. She was curious, and something in the back of her mind told her this might have something to do with Ethan Carter. When she arrived, Ryan was already there, leaning back in his chair with an easy smile. His charm was evident, but Olivia wasn't easily impressed. "Olivia, thank you for coming," Ryan said as she took a seat across from him. "I have a proposition for you." Olivia folded her arms, her expression guarded. "I'm listening." Ryan wasted no time. He explained the Batho Ethan had agreed to marry a woman who wasn't his usual type, someone who wouldn't be swayed by his wealth or charm. Olivia's mind raced as she processed what Ryan was saying. "So you're saying Ethan Carter agreed to marry a stranger for 6 months as part of a bet?" Olivia asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Ryan nodded, his grin never fading. "Exactly. And I think you'd be perfect for this. You're not his type, and you wouldn't let him control you. In fact, I think you might be the only woman who could actually challenge him." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. This was her chance. A chance to get close to Ethan Carter and make him pay for what he had done to her family. She didn't care about the money or the bet itself. She cared about justice, and this was the perfect opportunity. "Why would I agree to this?" Olivia asked, keeping her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. Ryan leaned forward, his tone more serious. "You're smart. You know this could be more than just a bet. It could be a way to show Ethan that his money and power don't mean anything. And who knows, maybe you'll even get something out of it." Olivia stared at Ryan for a long moment, weighing her options. This could be dangerous, but it was also the perfect chance to strike back at Ethan in a way he would never expect. "I'm in," Olivia said finally, her voice resolute. "But I have my own conditions." Ryan smiled, clearly pleased with her decision. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Days later, Olivia received the formal invitation to meet Ethan. The first meeting would be at a high-end restaurant in the city, a place where Ethan liked to show off his wealth. Olivia, however, was unimpressed by grand displays of luxury. She had already seen enough of the superficial world Ethan inhabited to last a lifetime. When she arrived at the restaurant, dressed simply yet elegantly, she noticed Ethan immediately. He stood out, not just because of his good looks or expensive suit, but because of the aura of confidence he exuded. He was used to getting what he wanted, and Olivia could see it in the way he carried himself. Ethan rose from his seat as she approached, offering a polite but controlled smile. "Olivia Turner." She met his gaze without hesitation. "That's right." They exchanged pleasantries, but Olivia could sense Ethan's underlying arrogance. He thought he was in control, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. This was her game now. After they ordered, Ethan leaned back, studying her with interest. "So, why did you agree to this?" Olivia didn't flinch. "I have my reasons." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Care to elaborate?" Olivia shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not yet." Ethan seemed intrigued by her mysterious demeanor, but he didn't press further. Instead, he made a subtle attempt to test her boundaries, casually mentioning the luxurious lifestyle she would have access to if she married him. But Olivia wasn't biting. "I'm not interested in your money or your lifestyle, Ethan," she said calmly. "This is a temporary arrangement, and I intend to walk away the same person I was when I entered it." Ethan was taken aback by her bluntness, but he quickly composed himself. This was going to be more challenging than he thought, and that only made him more determined. The wedding was a cold, unceremonious affair. To Ethan, it was little more than a formality, a means to an end. Olivia played her part well, appearing calm and indifferent throughout the ceremony, even as she plotted her next moves. After the vows were exchanged, Ethan took her to his penthouse, a symbol of his wealth and success. The huge glass windows overlooked the city, and the interior was filled with the most expensive decor money could buy. To him, this was the real battleground where he would win her over. But from the moment Olivia stepped into the penthouse, she made it clear she wasn't impressed. 6 months, Ethan, she said firmly, her gaze unwavering. Not a day more. Ethan smiled, confident that he would break through her defenses. He had done it with countless women before, and Olivia would be no different. Or so he thought. The first few weeks of Ethan and Olivia's marriage were marked by an uneasy silence. Olivia made no effort to get closer to Ethan, and he quickly realized that she wouldn't be won over by the usual trappings of wealth. Lavish gifts, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, even a luxury car were all politely refused or met with indifference. For Ethan, this was foreign territory. He was used to women swooning over his wealth and status, and yet here was Olivia, standing firm in her resolve. She continued with her modest routine, unaffected by the glamour that surrounded her. Every time Ethan tried to impress her, she met him with a calm smile and the same unwavering words, "I don't need these things." Ethan couldn't help but feel a growing sense of frustration. He was used to being in control, used to getting his way. But Olivia was a puzzle he couldn't solve, and that only made him more determined. He began to see her indifference not as a roadblock, but as a challenge. And Ethan Carter loved a challenge. But Olivia was not swayed. She had come into this marriage with a plan of her own, and no matter what Ethan tried, she remained focused. This wasn't about love or luxury for her, it was about justice. And she wasn't going to let Ethan win. Ethan was no stranger to manipulation. In business, he had perfected the art of control, manipulating markets, people, and situations to his advantage. He saw no reason why his marriage should be any different. If Olivia wouldn't be swayed by his wealth, he'd try a different approach. He started small, controlling her schedule in subtle ways. Had arranged for important meetings and events to be cancelled without warning, leaving Olivia confused and frustrated. He began to dominate her time, insisting that she attend events with him, often keeping her waiting for hours at business dinners or social functions where she was nothing more than a prop. At first, Olivia let it slide, recognizing Ethan's attempts to push her buttons. But when he started preventing her from attending work, insisting that as his wife, she no longer needed to earn a paycheck, Olivia began to fight back. One morning, after yet another argument about her work, Olivia stood in front of Ethan, her eyes sharp with defiance. "You can't control me, Ethan. I have my own life, and that's not going to change just because of a marriage certificate." Ethan leaned back, his frustration barely concealed. "Why do you insist on working when you don't need to? You have everything you could ever want right here." "That's where you're wrong," Olivia replied coolly. "I don't want what you have. I want my independence. I won't let you take that away from me." Ethan was taken aback by her resolve. No one had ever stood up to him like this before. He was used to getting his way, but Olivia refused to bend to his will. Her strength both infuriated and intrigued him, and it only made him more determined to find a way to break through her defenses. One evening, Ethan decided to test Olivia's resolve in a more public setting. He invited her to a high-profile dinner party, filled with influential people from the business world, people who would expect Olivia to play the role of the obedient, supportive wife. Olivia, however, had no intention of playing along. She attended the party, but instead of blending into the background, she made her presence known. She engaged in thoughtful conversations with Ethan's business associates, challenging their ideas, and even questioning some of Ethan's decisions in front of them. By the end of the night, Ethan was furious. He had expected Olivia to stay quiet, to follow his lead, but instead, she had undermined him in front of his peers. When they returned home, Ethan confronted her. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice low but filled with anger. Olivia met his gaze without flinching. "That was me being myself. I'm not your puppet, Ethan. If you want a wife who'll smile and nod at everything you say, you married the wrong woman." Ethan stared at her, struggling to contain his anger. Olivia was right, she wasn't like the others, and that infuriated him. But beneath the anger there was something else, something he couldn't quite identify. Respect, admiration. Whatever it was, it unnerved him. He was supposed to be in control, But Olivia was slowly chipping away at the walls he had built around himself. And for the first time Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: vulnerability. Over the next few weeks, Ethan intensified his efforts to control Olivia, but she resisted at every turn. He tried to isolate her, cutting off her connections to the outside world. He canceled her meetings, delayed her projects, and even sabotaged events she was organizing. But no matter what he did, Olivia remained calm, never letting him see how much it affected her. The tension between them grew with each passing day, turning their home into a battlefield. Small provocations erupted into heated arguments, but Olivia was always one step ahead. Her words were sharp, diffusing every attempt Ethan made to belittle or control her. One night, after yet another argument, Ethan's frustration boiled over. "Why do you make this so difficult?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. Any other woman would be thrilled to live this kind of life. Olivia didn't flinch. "Because I'm not like any other woman, Ethan. I don't care about your money, your power, or your status. What I care about is respect. And right now, you're not giving me any." Ethan was stunned into silence. Respect. The word echoed in his mind, and for the first time he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had been going about this all wrong. Ethan's world was beginning to crumble, and he didn't know how to stop it. Every attempt to control Olivia had failed, and with each failure his frustration grew. But beneath the frustration, something else was starting to take root, something he wasn't ready to admit. He found himself thinking about Olivia more often than he cared to, not just about the bet or the challenge of winning her over, but about her as a person. Her strength, her intelligence, her determination, they were qualities he had never truly appreciated in anyone before, and it unnerved him. For years, Ethan had built his life around power and control. He had always believed that those were the keys to success, to happiness. But now, with Olivia standing firm against him, he was starting to question everything. Was this really what he wanted, to dominate and control? Or was there something more, something deeper that he had been missing all along? The tension between Ethan and Olivia finally reached its breaking point one night after a particularly heated argument. Ethan had once again tried to prevent Olivia from going to work, and she had had enough. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan," Olivia said, her voice shaking with anger. "You can't control me no matter how hard you try." Ethan clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. "Why do you have to make everything so difficult? Why can't you just let go and accept that this is how things are?" Olivia's eyes flashed with defiance. "Because I won't let you win, Ethan. I won't let you treat me like a pawn in your game." Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time he realized that this wasn't just about the bet anymore. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about something deeper, something he hadn't wanted to admit. "I don't want to control you," Ethan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to win. I don't know what I want anymore." Olivia's expression softened, but only for a moment. "Then figure it out, Ethan. Because until you do, we're never going to get anywhere." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the darkness. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. The walls he had built around himself were crumbling, and he was terrified of what lay beyond them. The next few days were a blur for Ethan. He threw himself into his work, trying to regain control over anything in his life. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about Olivia, about the way she had stood up to him, the way she had refused to back down. He had never met anyone like her before, and it was unsettling. But more than that, it was liberating. For the first time, Ethan realized that maybe he didn't want to be in control all the time. Maybe he didn't need to dominate every aspect of his life. The thought terrified him, but it also intrigued him. And as he lay awake at night, staring up at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, something inside him. The days after Olivia's confrontation left Ethan in turmoil. For the first time in his life, he felt out of control, not just over her, but over himself. He wasn't sure how to handle it. The strategies that had worked so well for him in business, with his colleagues and even in past relationships, were utterly useless against Olivia. She was strong, steadfast, and completely uninterested in the trappings of his wealth or power. Late one night, unable to sleep, Ethan found himself pacing the penthouse. The city's lights flickered through the massive windows, casting shadows across the room, but the view, which usually filled him with confidence, felt empty. Everything felt empty. When Olivia walked into the living room, Ethan stopped pacing. She had been keeping her distance for the past few days, and he knew she was trying to avoid more conflict. But tonight, the tension between them had reached a boiling point. "Olivia," he started, his voice tight with frustration. "We can't keep doing this." Olivia met his gaze calmly, but there was fire in her eyes. "Doing what, Ethan?" "You mean, I can't keep resisting you." He clenched his fists, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Why do you make everything so difficult? I've done everything I can to make this work. Any other woman would be happy." Not any other woman." Olivia's voice cut through the air like a blade. Her calm facade cracked, revealing the pain and anger she'd been holding back for weeks. "You think this is about the money, about the lifestyle? It's never been about that for me." "Then what is it about?" Ethan shot back, frustration seeping into his words. "What do you want from me?" Olivia took a deep breath, her eyes locking with his. "Respect, Ethan. I want respect. But you don't understand that because you've never had to give it. You've spent your whole life buying people, controlling them, manipulating them to fit into your world. But I won't be one of them." Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She was right. For as long as he could remember, he had measured his success in terms of control over his business, his relationships, his entire world. But Olivia was the one thing he couldn't control, and it terrified him. Olivia took a step closer, her voice softening, though her eyes remained hard. "You don't understand me, Ethan. You don't even know who I really am." Ethan frowned, his heart pounding in his chest. "Then tell me. Help me understand." Olivia paused, and for a moment it seemed like she might walk away. But then, she turned to face him fully, and the words that followed shattered everything Ethan thought he knew. "I never told you why I agreed to this marriage," Olivia said, her voice steady but filled with quiet intensity. Ethan's brow furrowed. He had always assumed Olivia agreed because, like everyone else, she must have seen some benefit in it. He thought perhaps she saw it as a challenge, or maybe she was simply curious. But the truth was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you agree to this?" Olivia's expression darkened, the hurt and resentment she had kept hidden now rising to the surface. "Because I had a reason, Ethan. I had a reason long before this bet was ever made." Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together what she was saying. He had always felt like there was something she wasn't telling him, but he had never expected this. "You don't remember, do you?" Olivia asked, her voice filled with bitter amusement. "My family's company, Turner Technologies." Ethan froze. The name sent a shock of recognition through him. Turner Technologies had been a small, promising startup owned that Carter Enterprises had ruthlessly acquired and dismantled years ago. But it had been just another business deal, one of hundreds. He hadn't thought twice about it. Ethan stammered, unsure of what to say. "You destroyed us, Ethan." Olivia's voice trembled with emotion. "You came in with your lawyers and your contracts, and you ripped our company apart. My father, he couldn't handle it. He lost everything. He lost himself. And a year later, he was dead." The words hit Ethan like a freight train. He stood there stunned as Olivia's revelation sank in. This wasn't just about a marriage bet. This was about revenge. Her calm, collected demeanor had masked a deep personal vendetta. "I had no idea," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. "Olivia, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Olivia interrupted, her voice laced with bitterness. "People like you never look back at the lives you ruin. It's all about profit, about winning. But you never think about the consequences." Ethan's heart sank as he realized the full weight of what he had done. Turner Technologies had been a small company, one he had barely given a second thought to after the acquisition. But for Olivia, it had been her whole world, and he had taken it away from her. The room was thick with silence, the weight of Olivia's words pressing down on Ethan like a crushing force. He had spent his entire life believing that his success justified everything, that the people he stepped on were simply collateral damage in his rise to the top. But now, standing before Olivia, He could see the pain and loss in her eyes, and for the first time, he truly understood the consequences of his actions. "Olivia," Ethan began, his voice cracking, "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing." "That's the problem, Ethan," Olivia said quietly. "You didn't care, and you still don't. This marriage, this petit was just another game to you. But for me it was personal." Ethan swallowed hard, his chest tightening with guilt. He had never considered how his actions might affect real people, how they might destroy lives. But now, looking at Olivia, he realized just how blind he had been. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words feeling weak and inadequate. "I'm so sorry." For a moment Olivia said nothing. She stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger, pain, and something else, something he couldn't quite identify. "Sorry won't bring my father back," Olivia said finally, her voice breaking. "And it won't erase what you did." Ethan's heart ached with guilt, but he knew there was nothing he could say to fix it. He had spent so long focused on his own success, on winning at all costs, that he had lost sight of what really mattered. And now he was paying the price. But as he stood there, shattered by Olivia's revelation, a new feeling began to take hold, a determination to make things right, to prove to Olivia that he could change. "Let me try," Ethan said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Let me try to make it right. I know I can't undo the past, but I can be better. I want to be better." Olivia looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally she spoke. "I don't know if you can," she said softly. "But if you're serious about changing, then prove it. Not with words, but with actions." Ethan nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. He didn't know if Olivia would ever forgive him, but he was determined to try. And for the first time in his life, he realized that winning wasn't about control or power. It was about earning respect, trust, and redemption. Ethan woke the next morning with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. The world he had built for himself, one of power, wealth, and control, suddenly seemed hollow. For the first time he understood that true success wasn't measured in dollars or dominance, but in the relationships he built, the trust he earned, and the lives he impacted. His first step was to back away from the manipulative tactics he had used to control Olivia. He canceled the meetings and events he had previously forced her to attend. He stopped interfering with her work and gave her the space she had always asked for. Olivia noticed the changes, but she remained cautious. She wasn't ready to let her guard down just yet, and Ethan knew he had a long way to go before he could earn her trust again. But he was willing to try. He was willing to do whatever it took to prove to Olivia and to himself that he could be a better man. Ethan Carter had never felt guilt like this before. The realization of how much damage his actions had caused, not just to Olivia but to countless others, weighed on him every day. For the first time he truly grasped the human cost of his relentless pursuit of power and success. Olivia's revelation about her father's death haunted him. He couldn't stop thinking about the man he had never met, a man whose life he had ruined without a second thought. Every time he passed Olivia in the penthouse, he felt the weight of her silent judgment. She didn't have to say anything, the truth was already too much for him to bear. As the days passed, the once cold silence between them became unbearable. Ethan had stopped trying to control Olivia. He had given her space like she asked. But the distance between them now felt insurmountable, and it was driving him to the brink. The guilt gnawed at him, eating away at the confidence and certainty that had once defined him. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt powerless, not just over Olivia, but over himself. He had no idea how to make things right, but he knew he had to try. One evening, unable to bear the tension any longer, Ethan decided to talk to Olivia. He found her sitting on the balcony, her legs curled up beneath her as she gazed out at the city skyline. The lights of New York shimmered in the distance, but the beauty of the scene felt hollow. "Olivia?" Ethan said softly, stepping out onto the balcony. "Can we talk?" She didn't look at him at first, her gaze still focused on the horizon. But after a long moment she sighed and gestured to the chair beside her. "Go ahead." Ethan sat down, unsure of where to begin. For a man who had always known what to say, the words felt impossible now. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me," he began, his voice low, "about your father, and everything I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I was blind. I was so focused on winning that I didn't see the damage I was causing." Olivia turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Why does it matter now, Ethan? You can't undo the past. My father is gone. My family's life was torn apart, and you went on with yours without a second thought." "I know," Ethan said, his chest tightening. "I can't change what I did, but I can try to make amends. I want to try, Olivia, not just for you, but for everyone I've hurt." For the first time, Ethan's words didn't feel like a calculated move. They came from a place of genuine remorse, a feeling he had never experienced before. He had spent his life manipulating people, but this wasn't manipulation. This was an admission of failure. Olivia looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was the pain in his eyes, the pain of a man who had finally realized the cost of his actions. "Words are easy, Ethan," Olivia said quietly. "Actions are harder." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know, and I'm going to prove to you that I can change." Olivia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood up, wrapping her arms around herself as she looked back out at the city. The silence between them was heavy, but it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a beginning, a fragile, uncertain beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. The next day, Ethan made a decision. He had spent too long hiding behind his wealth and power, and it was time to face the consequences of his actions. If he was going to earn Olivia's respect, and perhaps one day her forgiveness, he needed to start by making amends. His first step was to reach out to the families and businesses he had harmed over the years. He knew it wouldn't be easy, many of them probably hated him as much as Olivia did. But he couldn't move forward until he had at least tried to make things right. Ethan spent the next few weeks doing something he had never done before, listening. He visited the small business owners whose companies he had destroyed, sitting down with them in their homes or offices and hearing their stories. For the first time, he wasn't the powerful CEO handing down orders, he was a man seeking forgiveness. Some accepted his apologies, others didn't. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was finally taking responsibility for his actions. He began donating money to recovery funds for the businesses that had been hurt by his corporate takeovers. He set up scholarships for children whose families had suffered because of his ruthless decisions. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. Olivia watched Ethan's transformation from a distance. She was cautious, still unsure whether his change was genuine or just another manipulation. But as the days passed, she couldn't deny that something was different about him. He no longer tried to control her. He no longer flaunted his wealth or used it as a weapon. Instead, he seemed focused on something deeper, on becoming a better person. She heard about his efforts to make amends, his visits to the families he had hurt. It was surprising, to say the least. She had never imagined Ethan Carter as the type to apologize for anything. But despite the changes, Olivia wasn't ready to let her guard down. She had been hurt too deeply, and the pain of losing her father still lingered. Forgiveness, if it came, would take time, and Ethan had a long way to go before he earned it. Despite Ethan's efforts, the distance between him and Olivia remained. They lived in the same penthouse, but their interactions were few and far between. Olivia had built walls around herself, and Ethan knew he couldn't tear them down with apologies or grand gestures. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, the silence between them was palpable. Ethan had cooked dinner, something simple but thoughtful. It was the first time they had shared a meal together in weeks. "I saw what you've been doing," Olivia said suddenly, breaking the silence. "The visits to the businesses you hurt. The scholarships. It's commendable." Ethan glanced up, surprised. "Thank you. It's a small step, but I'm trying." Olivia nodded, her gaze dropping to her plate. "You're trying," she echoed softly. "But it doesn't change what happened. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Ethan." Her words cut deep, but Ethan knew they were coming from a place of honesty. He had done terrible things, things that couldn't be undone with a few good deeds. But he wasn't looking for a quick fix anymore. He was in this for the long haul. "I understand," Ethan said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll keep trying." They continued their meal in silence, but there was a subtle shift in the air. The walls between them were still there, but cracks were beginning to form. Olivia wasn't ready to forgive him, but she was watching, waiting to see if his change was real. A few days later, Olivia surprised Ethan by asking if he would take a walk with her. It was a small gesture, but for Ethan, it felt monumental. He agreed immediately, and they spent the afternoon walking through Central Park, the crisp autumn air swirling around them. They didn't talk about the past. Instead, they focused on simple things, the changing colors of the leaves, the sound of children playing, the quiet hum of the city around them. For the first time in months, the tension between them seemed to ease, if only for a little while. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at Olivia. She looked more relaxed, more at peace. He didn't know if it was a sign that she was softening toward him, but he didn't want to push it. He was willing to take things slowly, to let her decide when or if she was ready to move forward. That night, as they returned to the penthouse, Olivia turned to Ethan before heading to her room. "I appreciate the effort you're making," she said quietly. "I see it. But I still need time." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Olivia gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile before disappearing into her room. For Ethan, that tiny smile felt like a victorious, small but meaningful step in the right direction. Just as things seemed to be slowly improving, Ethan faced an unexpected challenge. One of his former business rivals, a man named Greg Hawthorne, caught wind of Ethan's recent efforts to change. Hawthorne was a bitter adversary, someone Ethan had crossed paths with during his more ruthless days, and he saw Ethan's newfound humility as a weakness. Hawthorne reached out, offering Ethan a business deal that could catapult Carter Enterprises back into the cutthroat world of hostile takeovers and corporate manipulation. It was the kind of deal Ethan would have jumped at in the pasta deal that would guarantee millions in profits. But Ethan had changed, and he wasn't interested in going back to the man he used to be. Still, the temptation gnawed at him. The deal was lucrative, and the part of Ethan that had always thrived on competition and control urged him to take it. Olivia, however, noticed the shift in Ethan's behavior almost immediately. She could sense his inner conflict, and one evening, she confronted him about it. "I heard about Hawthorne," Olivia said, her tone calm but firm. "He's trying to pull you back in, isn't he?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, he is." "And you're considering it?" Olivia said, her voice tinged with disappointment. Ethan met her gaze, his heart heavy. "It's hard, Olivia. Walking away from the kind of life I've always known. It's not easy." Olivia studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I get that. But if you go back to that world, everything you've been trying to change will mean nothing. You'll be the same man who destroyed my father's business, the same man I can't forgive." Her words cut deep, but Ethan knew she was right. If he went back to his old ways, everything he had worked for, the redemption, the trust he was trying to rebuild, would be lost. "I'm not going to take the deal," Ethan said finally, his voice filled with conviction. "I'm done with that part of my life. I promise you." Olivia nodded slowly, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. "Good," she said quietly, "because if you want me to even consider forgiving you, you can't go back to who you were." In the days that followed, Ethan stayed true to his word. He turned down Hawthorne's offer, choosing instead to focus on his efforts to rebuild the lives he had damaged. It wasn't an easy decision. His old life still called to him at times, but each time he resisted, he felt a little stronger. Olivia, too, began to lower her guard, though cautiously. She started joining Ethan for meals more regularly, and their conversations, once tense and brief, began to grow longer and more comfortable. They talked about everything except the past. Neither of them was ready to revisit the pain of what had happened. But in the absence of that conversation, they found common ground. One evening, as they sat together on the couch after dinner, Olivia surprised Ethan by resting her head against his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but for Ethan, it felt like a breakthrough. For the first time, they were close not just physically, but emotionally. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet," Olivia whispered, her voice soft but clear. "But I'm starting to believe you might deserve it someday." Ethan swallowed hard, his chest tightening with emotion. "That's all I need," he whispered back. "Just a chance." And with that, the first real crack in the wall between them began to show. As the weeks passed, Ethan and Olivia continued to grow closer, their interactions no longer fraught with tension, but instead filled with quiet understanding. They weren't fully reconciled. Olivia's walls were still there, and Ethan knew he hadn't fully earned her forgiveness yet. But the progress was undeniable. There was a softness in Olivia's eyes now, a willingness to let Ethan in that hadn't been there before. But something lingered in the background, a shadow that neither of them had confronted the full truth about Olivia's father's death. Olivia had told Ethan that his actions had caused her father's downfall, but she hadn't shared the full extent of the damage, and Ethan, sensing the depth of her pain, had never pressed for more details. Until now. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, the cool breeze swirling around them, Ethan finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been haunting him for months. "Olivia," he said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." She turned to him, her expression curious but cautious. "What is it?" Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself for what might come next. "You told me about your father, about how I ruined his business, and how that led to his death. But I feel like there's more you haven't told me. I don't want to push, but if we're going to move forward, I need to understand. I need to know the full truth." Olivia's face tensed, and she looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant lights of the city. For a long moment she said nothing, and Ethan feared he had overstepped. But then, she took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she began to speak. "You're right," she said softly. "There's more." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her to continue. "It wasn't just the business," Olivia began, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you destroyed my father's company, it wasn't just about money or status. It was about pride. My father, he was a proud man. He had spent his entire life building that company from nothing. And when it all came crashing down, he felt like a failure. He thought he had failed me and my mother. The stress, the pressure, it became too much for him." She paused, her voice cracking with emotion. "And when he couldn't take it anymore, he took his own life." Ethan's heart sank. He had known that Olivia's father had died, but he had never imagined that his actions had driven the man to such despair. The weight of her words hit him like a sledgehammer, and for a moment he couldn't speak. He felt sick to his stomach, the guilt overwhelming him. I had no idea," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Olivia turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears. "How could you have known, Ethan?" "You didn't care. You were too focused on your empire, too busy crushing anyone who got in your way." Her words weren't filled with anger. They were filled with pain, raw and unhealed. And that made them even harder to hear. "I'm so sorry, Olivia," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "I don't know how to make this right. I don't know if I even can." Olivia wiped a tear from her cheek, her expression softening just a little. "I don't expect you to fix it, Ethan. You can't. But knowing that you're truly sorry, that means something." For the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He knew he could never undo the damage he had caused, but maybe, just maybe, he could start to heal the wounds he had left behind. The morning after Olivia's revelation, Ethan awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent months trying to make amends for his past, but now he understood that true redemption wouldn't come from grand gestures or hollow apologies. It would come from proving, day by day, that he was committed to becoming a better man. His first step was to recommit to the promises he had made to himself, to Olivia, and to the people he had wronged. He continued his outreach to the families whose lives had been impacted by his ruthless business tactics, offering not just financial compensation, but his time, his resources, and his sincere efforts to help them rebuild. But his most important focus was Olivia. He didn't push her, didn't demand forgiveness or answers. He simply let her know that he was there, that he was willing to wait for as long as it took for her to heal, and for her to trust him again. Olivia, for her part, was beginning to see the changes in Ethan. She watched as he threw himself into his work of making amends, as he continued to resist the pull of his old life, even when business opportunities tempted him. And slowly she began to let her guard down. One evening, after a quiet dinner together, Olivia surprised Ethan by asking if he would join her for a walk. They strolled through the city streets, the lights twinkling above them as they walked side by side, the tension between them easing. "It's strange," Olivia said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I never thought we'd get to this point." Ethan glanced at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this," she said, gesturing between them. "Being able to talk, to walk together without all the anger and resentment. I didn't think I'd ever be able to feel this way around you." Ethan swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. He wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, how desperately he wanted to make things right. But he knew better than to rush her. Instead, he simply nodded. "I'm glad we're here." Olivia smiled, a small, tentative smile that warmed Ethan's heart. For the first time since they had married, he felt like there was hope for something real between them, something that went beyond the bet, beyond the pain of the past. Despite the progress they had made, Olivia still struggled with the question of whether she could ever truly forgive Ethan. The pain of her father's death weighed heavily on her, and while Ethan's efforts to change were genuine, she wasn't sure if it was enough. One evening, as she sat alone in the penthouse, Olivia found herself thinking back to the day her father had died. The grief, the anger, the overwhelming sense of loss, it all came flooding back, and for a moment she felt like she couldn't breathe. She stood up, pacing the room as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. How could she ever move past what had happened? How could she ever forgive the man who had caused so much pain, even if he was trying to change? But then she thought of Ethan, the man he was now, not the man he had been. She thought of the way he had softened, the way he had stopped trying to control her, the way he had shown her respect in ways he never had before. She thought of his sincere efforts to make amends, not just to her, but to everyone he had hurt. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about choosing to move forward despite the pain. Maybe it was about seeing the good in someone, even after they had done terrible things. Olivia took a deep breath, her mind made up. She wasn't ready to fully forgive Ethan yet, but she was ready to try. The next evening, Olivia and Ethan sat together in the living room, the quiet hum of the city outside their windows. For a while, they simply sat in comfortable silence, neither of them needing to fill the space with words. But then Olivia turned to Ethan, her expression serious. "I need to talk to you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Olivia to finally open up to him, to tell him how she really felt. "Of course," he said, his voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside him. Olivia took a deep breath, her gaze locked on his. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about my father, about what you did, and about us. And I've come to a decision." Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what she was about to say, but he knew he had to listen. "I'm not ready to forgive you completely," Olivia continued, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "What happened? It's still too raw. But I'm ready to move forward. I'm ready to try to build something with you, something real." Ethan's heart swelled with hope. He had spent months waiting for this moment, and now that it was here, he could hardly believe it. "Olivia?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me. I know I can never undo what I did, but I promise you I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your forgiveness. He'll do whatever it takes." Olivia smiled, a soft, genuine smile that warmed Ethan's heart. "I know, and that's why I'm willing to try." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. But this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a beginning, and for the first time in a long time Ethan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had a chance at redemption. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Olivia's relationship deepened in ways neither of them had expected. The walls between them had started to come down, and for the first time they allowed themselves to truly see each other, not as enemies, not as adversaries in a twisted game, but as two people trying to heal. They spent more time together, talking, laughing, and sharing the parts of themselves they had kept hidden for so long. Ethan learned more about Olivia's childhood, about the close bond she had shared with her father, and about the dreams she had once had for her own life before everything had fallen apart. And Olivia learned more about Ethan's past, too, about the pressures he had faced growing up, about the insecurities that had driven him to seek power and control, and about the loneliness he had felt despite all his success. They weren't perfect, and they still had a long way to go. But for the first time, they were building something real, something based on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. And slowly but surely, love began to blossom between them. Ethan and Olivia's relationship continued to evolve in the weeks following Olivia's decision to move forward. Though forgiveness was still a long way off, they had built a fragile but steady foundation of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The penthouse, once cold and filled with silence, now felt warmer. There was laughter at the dinner table, quiet conversations at night, and moments of unexpected tenderness that neither had anticipated. Ethan had never felt this way before, so vulnerable yet so alive. He was still haunted by his past mistakes, but for the first time he felt like he was on the right path. Olivia had given him a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As their bond deepened, Ethan found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. He no longer craved the power and control that had once driven him. Instead, he found fulfillment in the simple things: cooking dinner together, walking through the park, and sitting with Olivia on the balcony as they watched the city lights flicker below. Olivia, too, felt a shift within herself. She had spent so long holding on to her anger, using it as a shield to protect herself from further pain. But as she let that anger go, she began to see Ethan in a different light. He wasn't the man who had destroyed her family. He was someone who had been lost, just like her, and who was trying to make things right. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Olivia turned to Ethan, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Ethan glanced at her, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" "I mean, for us," Olivia clarified. "Where do we go from here?" Ethan's heart raced. He had been wondering the same thing for weeks, but he hadn't wanted to push her. He knew they were still healing, still rebuilding, and he didn't want to rush her into anything she wasn't ready for. But now, hearing her ask the question, he realized that they were both ready to take the next step. "I think we keep moving forward," Ethan said carefully. "We keep building this, whatever it is, and maybe one day we build something permanent." Olivia smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made Ethan's heart swell. "I think he'd like that." As their relationship grew stronger, Ethan knew that there was one final step he needed to take in his journey toward redemption. He had to face his past, not just with Olivia, but with the people he had wronged. He had already begun making amends with the families and businesses he had destroyed. But there was still one person he hadn't confronted: Greg Hawthorne, his old business rival who had tried to pull him back into the world of corporate ruthlessness. Hawthorne had been a key player in the cutthroat business world Ethan had once thrived in, and he had been the one to encourage some of Ethan's most ruthless decisions. Now Ethan knew that if he was going to truly leave that world behind, he had to confront Hawthorne and walk away from the life he had once known. One afternoon, Ethan arranged a meeting with Hawthorne at a quiet restaurant. As soon as he walked in, he felt the old tension return, the familiar urge to compete, to dominate. But this time he resisted it. He wasn't that man anymore. Hawthorne greeted him with a smug smile, as if he expected Ethan to fall back into their old ways. "Carter," Hawthorne said, leaning back in his chair, "I was wondering when you'd come to your senses. I assume you've changed your mind about my offer." Ethan shook his head, his resolve firm. "I'm not here to accept your offer, Greg. I'm here to tell you I'm done with all of this." Hawthorne raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Done? What are you talking about?" "I'm done with the cutthroat games, the power plays, all of it," Ethan said calmly. "I've spent too long hurting people, and I'm not going to be that man anymore." Hawthorne scoffed. "Come on, Ethan. Don't tell me you've gone soft." Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. "I've changed, Greg, and if you can't respect that, then we have nothing more to talk about." Hawthorne stared at him for a long moment, clearly taken aback by Ethan's newfound conviction. Finally, he shrugged. "Your loss, Carter. But don't expect anyone else to play nice in this world." Ethan smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. "I'm not looking for nice, Greg. I'm looking for something real." With that, Ethan stood and walked out of the restaurant, leaving his old life and his old self behind. As the months passed, Ethan and Olivia's relationship continued to flourish. They had built something strong, something real, and for the first time they both felt like they could see a future together. They had weathered the storm of their past and were ready to face whatever came next. But then, something unexpected happened, something that would change everything. One morning, Olivia woke up feeling nauseous, a sensation she hadn't experienced before. At first, she thought it was just stress or fatigue. But when the symptoms persisted for days, she decided to go to the doctor. The news she received was shocking. She was pregnant. Olivia sat in stunned silence as the doctor explained the results. She had never expected this, especially not now, in the midst of everything she and Ethan were going through. How could she bring a child into this world, knowing the history she and Ethan shared? And how would Ethan react to the news? That evening, as she returned to the penthouse, Olivia struggled with how to tell Ethan. She wasn't sure how he would take it, whether he would be excited, terrified, or somewhere in between. But she knew she had to tell him. She found him in the living room reading a book, his expression peaceful. For a moment she stood there watching him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ethan," Olivia said softly, her voice trembling slightly. He looked up, immediately sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" Olivia took a deep breath, her hands trembling. I went to the doctor today." Ethan's brow furrowed in concern. "Are you okay?" "What did they say?" "Impregnant?" Olivia blurted out, the words escaping her before she could stop them. For a moment Ethan was silent, his eyes wide with shock. Olivia braced herself for his reaction, unsure of what to expect. But then, to her surprise, Ethan's face broke into a wide, joyful smile. You're pregnant." Olivia nodded, her heart racing. "Yes." Without warning, Ethan pulled her into his arms, laughing and holding her close. "That's amazing, Olivia." "I can't believe it." Olivia blinked, surprised by his reaction. "You're happy." "Of course I'm happy," Ethan said, pulling back to look at her. "This is incredible. I know it's unexpected, but I'm ready for this. I'm ready to be a father." Olivia felt a wave of relief wash over her, the tension in her chest easing. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the joy of the moment, the joy of knowing that she and Ethan were going to start a family together. As the reality of their future together began to sink in, Ethan knew there was one more thing he needed to do. He had fallen in love with Olivia not just because of the circumstances that had brought them together, but because of the person she was. Strong, independent, and unyielding in her values, she had made him want to be a better man. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, Ethan led Olivia out onto the balcony, where the lights of the city sparkled below. It was the same balcony where they had shared so many important conversations, where their relationship had started to change. "Olivia," Ethan began, his heart racing, "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through, about how we started, where we are now, and where we're going." Olivia smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Ethan nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "We have, and I don't want to lose what we've built. I want to spend the rest of my life with you not because of a bet or an agreement, but because I love you." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring, its brilliance shining in the soft light. "I know this is unexpected," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I love you, Olivia. I love the life we're building together, and I want to make it official. Will you marry me this time for real?" Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes as she looked at the man in front of her, the man who had once been her enemy, but who had since become the love of her life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his heart swelling with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the lights of the city sparkled around them. This time their marriage wouldn't be based on a bet. It would be built on love, trust, and the promise of a future they would face together. A few months later, Ethan and Olivia stood together in front of a small group of family and friends, exchanging vows in a quiet, intimate ceremony. It was nothing like their first wedding. There were no business contracts, no hidden agendas, and no expectations of control or power. This time it was real. Olivia's mother was there, smiling proudly as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. Ethan's family, too, had gathered to witness the moment, their support a reminder of how far he had come. As Ethan and Olivia stood before the officiant, their hands clasped together, they exchanged vows filled with love and sincerity. There was no need for grand declarations, just the quiet promise to stand by each other, no matter what the future held. "I promise to love you," Ethan said, his voice steady, "to respect you, and to be the man you deserve. For as long as we both live." Olivia smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "And I promise to love you, Ethan, to trust you, and to build a life with you, one filled with love, forgiveness, and hope." As they kissed, the small group of friends and family erupted into applause, but for Ethan and Olivia, the world around them seemed to disappear. In that moment, they were the only two people who mattered. As the months passed, Ethan and Olivia settled into their new life together, their love growing stronger with each passing day. Olivia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as they prepared to welcome their child into the world, they found themselves filled with a sense of peace and fulfillment. Ethan continued his efforts to make amends for his past mistakes, but now he did so with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just trying to atone for his wrongs, he was trying to build a better future, not only for himself and Olivia, but for their growing family. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Olivia resting her head on Ethan's shoulder, she looked up at him with a contented smile. "Who would have thought," she mused softly, "that it would all start with a bet?" Ethan chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It's funny, isn't it, that something so ridiculous could lead to something so wonderful?" Olivia nodded, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "But I'm glad it did. Because now we get to build this life together. And that's all I've ever wanted." As they sat together in the quiet of their home, Ethan knew that this life, this love was the best thing he had ever won. Not through manipulation, not through power, but through genuine love, hard-earned respect, and the promise of a future filled with hope. A few months later, Ethan and Olivia welcomed their baby girl into the world. As Ethan held their newborn daughter in his arms, tears filled his eyes. He had never imagined that his life could feel this complete, this meaningful. Olivia watched him, her heart full as she saw the joy in his eyes. They had come so far through pain, anger, and betrayal, but now they were a family. A real family. As Ethan looked down at their daughter, he smiled, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before. He had spent so long searching for power, for control, but now he realized that true strength came from love, from vulnerability, and from the willingness to change. "Welcome to the world, little one," Ethan whispered, his voice full of emotion. "You're going to have an amazing life." Olivia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they looked down at their daughter together. "She's perfect," Olivia whispered, her voice filled with awe. "She is," Ethan agreed, his heart swelling with love. And as they sat together in the quiet of the hospital room, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning of a life filled with love, forgiveness, and endless possibilities. They had started with a bet, but now they had built something real, something that would last forever. What do you think? Do you believe in second chances, or is some damage too deep to repair? We'd love to hear your thoughts on Ethan and Olivia's journey in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more inspiring tales of love, redemption, and hope. Thanks for watching.
And as long as he stayed true to his values, he knew he was on the right path. The night stretched on, full of promise and potential. And as Ethan gazed out at the city below, he couldn't help but feel excited for the future, for the challenges, the victories, and the continued fight for a world where everyone, no matter who they were, could rise to their full potential. This was his legacy, and it was just the beginning. As Ethan gazed out at the city below, he couldn't help but feel excited for the future, for the challenges, the victories, and the continued fight for a world where everyone, no matter who they were, could rise to their full potential. This was his legacy, and it was just the beginning. If you've enjoyed this story of Ethan's journey toward leadership and change, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more inspiring stories like this one. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Together we can keep the conversation about diversity and inclusion going. I was thinking about it too, James said, his voice quiet but reflective. It feels like so much has happened, but at the same time, it's hard to believe how far we've come. Mildred nodded, her eyes misting over with emotion. I never thought I'd live to see the day when this town could change like this. For so long it felt like we were stuck. But you showed us something different. You showed us that we could be better. James felt a lump form in his throat. I didn't do it alone, Mildred. It's been all of us. People like you, Rachel, Emily, Tommy even. Mildred chuckled softly. Maybe, but we all needed someone to remind us what we were capable of. That's what you did, James. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the sunset over the park. It was a quiet, reflective moment, one that reminded James of why he had stayed, why he had chosen to fight for this town. It's not over, James said, more to himself than to Mildred. There's still work to be done. There's always more to be done, Mildred replied with a knowing smile. But you've given this town something it didn't have before: hope. Meanwhile, Emily Green had been working on her biggest story yet. The pieces she had written for the local paper had caught the attention of a national magazine, and they had commissioned her to write a long-form feature about the transformation of Hollow Creek. She had spent months interviewing people: James, Tommy, Rachel, Sheriff Nate Johnson, and countless others. She poured her heart into the article, determined to capture the essence of what had happened in this small town. It wasn't just a story about racism or a fight for equality. It was about community, about resilience, about the power of one person's actions to ignite change. When the feature was published, it was an instant success. Readers from across the country were moved by the story of Hollow Creek, and Emily was flooded with messages of support. People wanted to know more. How had the town done it? How could they replicate that success in their own communities? For Emily, it was a deeply personal victory. She had grown up in Hollow Creek, and for a long time, she hadn't believed that the town could change. But now, as she read the responses to her article, she knew that anything was possible. The next spring, the first integrated class graduated from Hollow Creek High School. It was a historic moment, not just for the students, but for the entire town. The graduation ceremony was held in the town square, and the entire community showed up to celebrate. James was there, sitting in the front row with Mildred, Tommy, and Rachel, all of them beaming with pride. Lily Sanders, Mildred's granddaughter, gave the valedictory speech, speaking eloquently about the future, about unity, and about the lessons they had learned from the town's struggles. We are the generation that will carry this town forward, Lily said, her voice clear and strong, and we will do it together. Because we've learned that we are stronger when we stand as one. The crowd erupted into applause, and as the graduates tossed their caps into the air, there was a sense of triumph, of new beginnings. Hollow Creek had come so far, and now a new generation was ready to take the reins. As the town continued to grow and change, Harold Brooks made a surprising announcement. He was bringing back the name Rose's Diner. But this time, the name would reflect something different. Harold stood outside the diner, addressing a small crowd of onlookers. James, Mildred, and the rest of the diner's regulars were there, curious about the announcement. Rose's Diner was named after my mother, Harold began, his voice filled with emotion. She was a kind woman, a woman who believed in treating everyone with respect. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We let this place become a symbol of division. Harold paused, glancing at James, who gave him an encouraging nod. But now I want to reclaim that name, Harold continued. This diner is going to stand for something new, something my mother would be proud of. It's going to be a place where everyone is welcome, where everyone has a seat at the table. The crowd cheered, and as the new sign for Rose's Diner was unveiled, it felt like a fitting tribute to the town's journey. As summer approached, Rachel Morales prepared to leave Hollow Creek once again, this time for good. Her work had taken her to other towns and cities, and while she had grown deeply attached to Hollow Creek, she knew it was time to move on. On her last night in town, she gathered with James, Emily, and the others at Rose's Diner for one final meal. The atmosphere was warm and nostalgic, filled with laughter and shared memories. "I'm going to miss this place," Rachel admitted as she sipped her coffee. "But I know you all are going to keep the momentum going." "Well, miss you too, Rachel," James said, smiling warmly. "But don't worry, we've got this." They spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about the town's journey, about how far they had come, and about the road that still lay ahead. When it was time to say goodbye, there were hugs, tears, and promises to keep in touch. But as Rachel drove away from Hollow Creek the next morning, she left knowing that the town was in good hands. Several months after Rachel's departure, James received a letter from her. He sat on his porch, the autumn air crisp and cool, as he read her words. "Dear James, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about Hollow Creek a lot lately, and I wanted to check in. I've been working with a community out west, and it reminds me so much of where Hollow Creek was when I first arrived. But seeing the progress we made gives me hope that change is possible, no matter where you are. I just wanted to thank you once again for everything you've done for the town and for me. You've taught me so much about patience, about perseverance, and about how change really happens. You'll never forget our time together. Take care of yourself, James, and take care of Hollow Creek. With gratitude, Rachel." James smiled as he folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. Rachel's words were a reminder that their work was far from over, but it was also a reminder of how much they had already accomplished. Over time, Tommy Barnes fully embraced his role as a leader in the town's new direction. He became a regular volunteer at the community center, working with young people who, like him, had once been resistant to change. One afternoon, as Tommy sat on a bench outside the center, talking with a group of teenagers, he realized just how far he had come. The anger and fear that had once controlled him were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. "I used to think change was something to be afraid of," Tommy told the teens, "but now I see it's what makes us better. We can't grow if we don't open ourselves up to new ways of thinking." The teens listened intently, nodding in agreement. Tommy's journey had become an inspiration to many, showing that it was never too late to change. One year after the March for Unity, the town of Hollow Creek came together once again to celebrate. The town square was filled with music, food, and laughter, as people from all walks of life gathered to reflect on the progress they had made. James stood with Sheriff Nate Johnson, Emily Green, and Lily Sanders, watching the festivities with a deep sense of pride. The town was thriving, its people united by a shared vision of a better future. As the sun set over the town, casting a golden glow over the square, James felt a quiet sense of contentment. Hollow Creek had been through so much, but they had come out the other side stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever. In the years that followed, Hollow Creek continued to evolve. The town's story became a beacon of hope for other communities struggling with their own divisions. People came from far and wide to visit Rose's Diner, to see the mural painted by the teenagers, and to meet the people who had made change possible. But for James, it wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about being a hero or a leader. It was about the quiet, steady work of building a community where everyone had a place. As he sat on his porch one evening, watching the stars twinkle above the town, James felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, that there would always be more work to do. But for now, in this moment, he was content. Hollow Creek was his home, and it was a home worth fighting for. As the story of James and Hollow Creek shows, change takes courage, community, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. If you've been inspired by their journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the importance of unity, justice, and hope. And remember, your voice matters. Let us know in the comments how this story touched you and what kind of stories you'd love to hear next. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free. Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel." You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbors' sons, strangers, had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." "I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith." "Really? I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. I'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She too had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them. That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now we have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better, now richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.